Uh-oh. Well, isn't that nice? First page is missing. Yeah. I should have known that when I printed it up this morning. I was like, took it out, put it in my folder, and I said, why is the printer starting up again? It does that. My printer is temperamental. It prints stuff like that. Anyway, so recently I've been looking at some futuristic fiction. Some futuristic fiction. You say, what's futuristic fiction? Well, I've been reading books on I thought I was looking up like utopia, but I was also trying to look up communism and what it would look like in the future. So I got a few books you might recognize. George Orwell's Animal Farm, kind of not a utopia, maybe more of a dystopia. And then, of course, his most famous one, 1984, which was the year before I graduated high school, and it never came to be, or has it yet, right? So the reason why I looked these things up is because I wanted to compare them to some of the people were talking, and they were talking about communism and how communism can be related to Christianity, at least the first part of Christianity. I was like, I don't know about that. It's a big difference there. But anyway, so I'm looking at these books. I'm looking at Orwell, and I'm looking at his two books. And by the way, I have to say, I watched Foundation. There's a show on Apple that James had turned me on to, and I ended up watching 2 seasons in the last week. So it's a great show. It's written by Isaac. How do you say his name? Asimov. Yeah. Anyway, he had books he written in the 50s, futuristic kind of show about an empire and how it's ruled by these clones, these 3 clones. And what that happens is the one clone is the young clone, and he's not in power yet. The middle clone is the one that's in power. He's 25 to 30 to 45, so he's in the prime of his life. And then the old one, who used to be the one in power, and they just rotate these clones like this. So interesting. Anyway, futuristic. So that's what I've been doing. And one of my favorites, and I used to think that this was a book about utopia. I mean, it sounds good from a certain angle, and that is all. Why do I got to do these authors so you can't pronounce their name? Say his name. Aldous Huxley. Thank you. A Brave New World. If you haven't seen it or if you haven't read it, it's a good book. It's about a futuristic world where everything is so systematized. It's a beautiful thing. Everybody works. Everybody has a place in this society until you look behind the scene. And then you find out early in the book about how they raise children. They don't raise children. They kind of grow and develop children. Children are not born in a Brave New World. They're quote unquote test tube babies. And then they're actually incubated as embryos in a artificial womb until they're 9 months in the womb, and then they come out and they have like a process where they pretend like they're being born out of this womb. And then they don't go to a parent, they go to a government child facility where they're raised and they're trained to be functioning part of society. Now, the interesting part about that is, which is really cool, but unfortunately, these embryos aren't equal. From the time they're in their test tubes, in their little artificial wombs, they're conditioned to be part of a hierarchical system in their society. So some of them are deprived of oxygen so that they won't grow and have a decent intelligence. So these ones would be doing the menial labor positions. And then others are given oxygen, and they're also given some stimulations outside, like music and things that will stimulate their intelligence. And these will go up to be the leaders and the thinkers of the society. And then when they're put into these facilities, they're put into the facilities, and some wear gray suits, some wear orange suits, some wear blue suits. And these are to distinguish where you are in the society. And the children are trained. They're conditioned to like their lot in society. And they're also conditioned to hate nature. They're conditioned not to like nature, because nature is natural. And that's wilding things. That's the things that were done away with, because or in the book, they are a culture that is on technology, and they've done away with all this stuff. As a matter of fact, they don't have relations like we have relations. I've already said they don't have families. They're raised in children's facilities. Well, when they're older and they become of age and they want to have relationships, they don't have intimate relationships, or they have intimate relationships, but they don't last. They're only supposed to be one or two times, and then you move on to another person. And so they don't build a relationship. And then you see that this whole society, while it's based on the society, the individuals aren't really a part of the society, but they're just cogs in a wheel. And there's no emotional exchange. There's no in-depth relations. And that's where the protagonist of the book comes in. His name is Henry Foster. And he goes on vacation to, I think it's supposed to be America Southwest, where he comes in contact with some wildings. And there's people that aren't part of society. They live in nature. They do nature things. And he finds a friend that was born of a mother. And he loved his mother. And the whole story kind of revolves around this. Him learning that there's something outside of what they have in their society of me and my pleasures, but yet society as a whole. And I thought, wow, is that a utopia, or is that kind of a dystopia? Can you imagine living in a place where you have no relationships? That each of your relationships, as a matter of fact, two of the women are talking, and the one who's seeing Henry and has seen him for a couple months now, it's like, whoa, what are you doing? You need to get away from him. You need to find some other guy to be intimate with. And so, interesting. This, of course, is fiction. And it could never come to fruition, right? Well, I thought I would go ahead and look at communism to see how it differs from fiction, what we think of communism, and also the fears that we have of communism. So I went back and I looked at Karl Marx and what his ideas of communism were supposed to be. And at first glance, if we look in the book of Acts and you look at the early church, The early church says that all the people in the church held everything in common. And they gave to anyone in need. They even sold their properties to give to the poor and the needy. Well, that kind of sounds like what Karl Marx had originally started with his idea. And now there's a big difference here. Let me say that. If I can be a history teacher for a second. Karl Marx's ideas were labeled Marxism. And Marxism differs from communism. Because Marxism and communism, well, let's say communism took Marxism and twisted it for their own purposes. And what happens is they developed a system out of Marxism that was not based on what Karl Marx wanted to do away with, the idea of this power or the idea of inequality. In other words, he wanted everybody to be equal. Everybody was equal. Everybody got paid the same. Everybody, and that sounds like an egalitarian community that he was talking about. Only Karl Marx didn't believe in that. Karl Marx believed in a hierarchy of society. Karl Marx thought that the idea of egalitarianism, that is, everybody is equal, everybody's the same, he said that that was just a political propaganda tool to satisfy the bourgeois or the middle class so that they felt good about where they were on that hierarchy. And those in the poor, of course, want to strive for the middle class. And the middle class has dreams of one day being the rich and the rulers. So you have this hierarchy that's supposed to be done away with, but it's always going to be there. And so Karl Marx said that's just a political tool, and he pushed it aside. So what do we have here? We have Marxism, who actually tried to make everything equal. And then we have communism, who took that idea that, remember, he believed in a hierarchy, and so did they. They make everything equal in the fact that everyone is equal except the ruling class. Then when you get to the ruling class, well, they have a lot on their minds and a lot of responsibilities. So, of course, you have to give them special benefits. And you can see how communism is going to fail. Because you got all these people that are supposed to be equal, and then you got these other people that are looking down on you and trying to keep you there. So they have spies and they have all these other. And communism is failing. But guess what? What does it become? Well, we see in Russia right now, we see this oligarchy standing up. Once again, the hierarchy of society. And see, this is what we want to get away with. This is where I say, I'm looking for a utopia. I'm looking for a church. I'm looking for Christianity to take over and make everything equal. Everything is equal. Everybody is treated with respect. From the guy that sweeps the sewers to the guy that runs a company. They're both important because they're people. And I believe that that's what the church is supposed to be. And that's what the church is supposed to teach. And I think that's what the church was meant to do. See, Jesus talks about the church as a kingdom. I say kingdom, not kingdom, because I think that this church has progressed. We get away with this idea of a king, and we look at it as Jesus did. We're all brothers and sisters. Isn't that what the scripture said? Who are my brothers and sisters? Okay. So we have a kingdom is our society or our community, and we are to be transforming, changing life around us. That is the world around us. And we're supposed to do it not in heaven when we all get to heaven. No, we are supposed to be doing it here and now. This is kind of like practice for when we do get to heaven, and everybody is equal. Do you think there's jobs in heaven? You ever think about that? Huh? I mean, you think about it, somebody's got to pick up the trash, right? You're not going to like have a wrapper and you open, you eat something, you just throw the wrapper and poof, it disappears. And somebody's got to work the gate. Somebody's got to lead the worship. Anyway, the kingdom is a society. It is a community. We are the kingdom. We are a community of believers. And the most important thing is the community is shaped by what I talked about for the last 4 or 5 weeks. The Jesus Creed. Come on, what's the Jesus Creed? We've been saying it. Love God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. And the second is to love God or love your neighbor as yourself. This is the Jesus Creed. This is what Jesus taught us. Foremost of all the things that we are supposed to do as Christians is those two things. We talked about this in Bible studies day. How these two things, the whole law and the whole prophets rest on these. So when you go to the prophets and you go to the laws, and I'm kind of repeating myself from 2 weeks ago, but when you go to those, you shouldn't say, oh yeah, we need to do that. Well, we need to do that, but we need to do it through the first two commandments. Loving God and loving your neighbor. And if we're not, then we're not a community based on the Jesus Creed. That should be the first and foremost things that we do. Love God and love our neighbor. The impact of this community is that we transform the world through the transformation of individuals. Does that make sense? So when you become a Christian and you decide to follow or to live by the Jesus Creed, then you become part of this community. And being part of this community is loving your neighbor. And see how it's just kind of a big circle. It comes back. Cindy says I'm supposed to say a bunch of times more, at least say it more, that your Christianity, let's say it again. Your salvation is personal. It's between you and God. Your Christianity is corporate. That's what you do with the world. And see, that's the same with the Jesus Creed. When you accept that, you're going to live by love God and love your neighbor. That's your individuality. That enters you into this community. And now this community, through loving God and loving your neighbor, is transforming the world. Through loving others, it's transforming the community, and it's transforming the world. While the kingdom is a community, it does begin with the individual. We can't go out into the world and say, we believe this, so you're going to do it. Now, we're going to elections, and we're trying to get people in office that believe like we do and think like we do and act like we do, because we want them to make sure that They make laws to protect our freedoms as we see them. But that's not going to change the world. Little, heads up to you. Remember, what was it? Roe versus Wade? Yeah. Roe versus Wade was put in place because of why? Because the people in power come to believe that, hey, that's a human right. And then what happened? People turned around and said, no, we're going to overturn that. And they put the people in place so that it could be overturned. And then it was brought up and it was overturned. Power, Roe versus Wade, different power overturns it. See how that works? That's why it's important that as a community we reach the individual and we teach them to live by the Jesus Creed. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Only through doing this will we expand the kingdom of God. The third thing about the kingdom, it is instead of acting in power, we're acting in power, we're acting out of love and compassion. Think about this. We'll stick to the subject. Think about this. It's a terrible thing that a life is started. The process of life has started. And then it has to end. But that's not the whole story. It's not just taking that embryo and ending that process of life. There's the father. There's the mother. There's the community. There's the situations behind it. It's not a simple black and white issue. And what we need is love and compassion for the individual that has to make that decision. Because I know that is a hard decision to make. What if it has to be the mother's life or that embryo's? What if the mother was put in a situation such as rape, such as something horrible happening to her, that she cannot go on? What becomes of that child when it's born and the mother resents that child? It's not black and white. And that's why it's important that we act in love and compassion. See, instead of power, that's how we should act. We should not say, you have to do this because we say it. But we act in love and compassion and teach them to act in love and compassion too. See, we do not seek power in our community, but rather we seek grace and forgiveness. Instead of exclusion, talked about this just a little bit ago. Exclusion, you can't do this. We don't want you to do this. We don't want you in our community. We seek inclusion. Come into our community. Be amongst us who are loving and compassionate, who are graceful and forgiving, because that's how we teach you. We don't say, ooh, we don't want you here. Go out there and do your nasty stuff someplace else. We say, come into us and let us show you what it means to live a life of love and compassion. Instead of exclusion, we seek inclusion. Instead of division and a hierarchy, we seek unity. and equality.
Sophia.
Unity and equality. Let me tell you something. One of the reasons why I am here at the UCC is because I read in one of the books that it said unity within diversity. That is the most beautiful thing. You think of unity, everything's together. Diversity, everything's different. So how do you get unity in diversity? I always point to a puzzle. A puzzle. That is unity in diversity. When you take all those different puzzle pieces and you put them together and they form this beautiful picture. And that's why I chose to be a UCC minister, is because that idea fits perfectly into my understanding of Christianity. We don't seek division. We don't seek a hierarchy. We seek unity and equality. And instead of living in a self-absorbed fashion, selfishness, which I call sin, we live in a self-giving society. Do you see the difference? If you live in a selfless society, guess what you have? You have, just like in the book, A Brave New World, people that are selfless. They don't care. They're just doing the deeds to fulfill their role in society. Like in 1984, they mindlessly go about doing what they do, not because it's what they love to do, but because that's what they're supposed to do. That's exactly, Big Brother is watching. That's not self-giving, that's selflessness. You do it because you hate it, but guess what? You have to do it. That's selflessness. That's not Christianity. Christianity is self-giving. It means I come here to this place to be with you all out of my giving of myself, my mind, my body, my ideas, everything. I come here to be self-giving. Does that make sense? Do you see the difference between selflessness and self-giving? Unfortunately, there are some Christians out there that talk about being selfless. Oh, I'm so selfless. Well, we don't want you to be selfless. We want you to be who you are and make that work, make that fit into that puzzle piece so that we can all make a big and better picture. See, as we love one another as ourselves, that's the Jesus Creed. That's who we are. Amen.